and I could choose to send that. That will now send that through, as well as display that within our repeating group here. Hello, my name is Lachlan Kirkwood, and today I'll be teaching you how to build a Slack clone entirely out of no-code using Bubble. I've been using no-code tools over the past 2 years, and I can easily say that Bubble's by far my favorite to use. I love that it gives you complete control over your own custom design, as well as the custom setup of your own database. And then it allows you to use powerful workflows to actually make your application functional. And then finally, it can also integrate with third-party tools and services. For those of you who don't know me, I've spent the past 2 years working with the Bubble team to write their How to Build blog series. This series took a list of the top products out there on the market, like Instagram, Salesforce, and Airbnb, and explained the step-by-step process of rebuilding them entirely out of no-code with their tool. While this written series was helpful to makers all across the world, I've decided to now create a video series of my own that helps makers like yourself bring your product visions to life. I would just like to note that this series has no affiliation with Bubble at all, and it is completely something I'm working on in my own time. Throughout this course, I'll be walking us through the step-by-step process to rebuilding our own Slack clone. This will include features like replicating Slack's onboarding process, allowing users to create new channels within a Slack workspace, displaying all of those channels on a homepage and then being able to navigate through them, and then on top of that, creating a feature to edit the details and settings of a channel. Of course, I'll also cover how you can send and receive messages within a channel, and then finally a feature that allows us to update the information we store within a user's Slack account. So grab your Bubble editor and let's get started. The first feature we'll be building out today isn't actually a core feature to the front-end user experience of our app. Instead, I wanted to take the time to run you through the process of building out your own custom database for our Slack clone, because this will be essential in order to build out any additional features on top of the experience we'll need to create today. Now, for the sake of this tutorial, I've just created a list of all of the different data types and fields I'd like to create within my application using Notion. I just love that Notion allows me to document and keep track of where I am throughout the build, and I can just tick off particular data fields when I add them in. And I also just use Notion to keep a track of all of the additional features I will be adding today throughout our separate modules. But if we scroll on up, you'll see that the database for our Slack clone is actually pretty straightforward. In comparison to some of my other builds, it's not as complex and won't take as long to create. What I would just like to mention though is that if you find yourself getting confused or lost at any given time throughout this tutorial, I'd recommend just pausing it at that point in time and rewatching the step a couple of times just to make sure you have a proper understanding of the concept at hand before we then move on to the next step within our build. Of course, I'll be doing my best to explain everything in as much detail as possible as we walk through it. So let's jump on over into our Bubble editor and head on into our database tab to get started. Over in my brand new Bubble editor here, I'm going to head over to my data tab on the side, which is just under my screen recording tool there. And if you are new to Bubble, the first thing you'll note is that by default, the editor already comes with a user data type pre-built into it. So this just allows users to register an account within your application. And you'll also see that it includes an email data field by default, which of course is essential when you're registering an account because you'll need to actually store a user's email within that account. Bubble also includes a password field for your users, but it just won't display that in plain text to you as an admin. One other thing I would like to note though before we move on to adding in our custom data fields and types is that you might notice here on the right hand side of our data type for our user that Bubble has listed that this has some privacy rules applied by default. Now, if you're watching this tutorial after early 2021, this is a relatively new feature that Bubble has added into their editor. And what it essentially means if we click into it is that only users who have created something within your application will be able to actually view that. So let's say in the use case of our Slack clone application today, a specific user was to create a message and send that into a channel. If we had privacy rules set across our application, only that person who created that message would be able to view it, so their team members within their Slack channel wouldn't actually see that message at all. And the same goes here for our user data type. So only a specific user would be able to view information about their account, so things like their name, their profile photo, or their job title. And that, of course, isn't the experience we'd like to create today. Because we're building a collaborative workspace tool, we want every team member to see the information of their teammates, as well as all of the content that they publish and create across our Slack channels. So what I just wanted to note is that you will need to delete this privacy rule here. So if you head over to the right hand side, you'll see a trash can icon. I'll select to delete that. And then if I also jump over to my data types tab here, I just want to make sure that this box here isn't checked, because essentially if I was to create a new data type and this box was checked, it would add those new privacy rules to that data type itself. And if you don't follow this step correctly, you'll find yourself previewing your application and the actual design of your app will more than likely look suitable, but you might just find that data itself isn't displaying with anything like your repeating groups that you've added to your pages. If that is the case, this is more than likely the reason why you're not seeing any data. So you just need to take the time early on to set this up appropriately. But now that I've ran you through that, let's jump over into our Notion doc again and just take a look at the different data types that we'll be adding into our build today. So I can see I have 4 different data types here, and then within each data type I have a list of the relevant data fields that will need to be stored within them. So my data types are our user, which is already added in by default. There's our team, so the Slack team itself, which of course within that would have a list of channels. So there's the Slack channels. And then within our channels, we would have messages, which of course is the actual messages that team members would exchange. So let's jump over into our bubble editor and we'll start by adding in all of the different data types that I've just explained. So there was our team data type, there was our channel data type, and then finally there was our message data type. Now within each of these, I'm going to build out the necessary data fields within them, and I'll start with our user data type here. So I can see that the data fields I'll need to add are listed in my Notion doc here, and I'll explain these as I go along. Essentially, I'm just going to start by adding in the details of the user that I would like to store and display across our application. So the first data field will be the user's name, and this is just a text field type. Then there was the job title data field. This once again will just be another text data field. Then after the job title, I would like to add in the profile photo of the user, which the field type for this will be an image property. I'll create that. And then what I'd like to do after adding in our profile photo is create a field that just identifies what Slack channels this user should have access to within our application. So the way I'll do this is by selecting to create a new field, and I'll be calling this field channels joined. And of course, I'd like this field type to be a Slack channel, but because a user can join multiple different Slack channels, I'll need to select that this is a list with multiple entries. I will create that. And then finally, the last field I'll need to add is just a field that recognizes what Slack team this user currently belongs to. So I will select to add in a new field called team, and I will select that this will be a team data type, so it can link out to that additional data type we've already created. And just for the sake of our MVP today, I'm just going to be allowing one user to join one specific Slack team. I will then choose to create that. And that is all of the data fields we'll need to add within our user data type. So if I jump back over into Notion, I will just check those off. The next data type, I can see this is a pretty straightforward one, is just the team here. I'm just going to add in a name for that specific Slack team. So that'll be the name of the company for the Slack workspace. I'll jump over into my bubble editor, open up my team data type, add a new field, and I'll just call this name. This will just be a text field. I'll create that. Then back in Notion, I can check that off. And the next data fields I'll need to add are under my channel data type. I'll jump back over to Bubble, open up my channel. And within this, I just like to add a new field. And the first field will just be the name of the channel, which of course is just a standard text field type. Then I would like to add a description for this channel, which again is just a text field type. And then finally, I would like to associate the Slack channel within a Slack team. So this will just designate it within a specific team and help us display a list of all of the total channels that belong within a single workspace. So I'll create a new field. I'll once again just be identifying this as the team the channel belongs to. And this channel will only be able to belong to one specific team. So I'll select the team data type, and I won't be selecting that this is a field with multiple entries. I will create that. Back in Notion, I will just tick all of those data fields off. And then finally, I would just like to add in my data fields for our message data type. This one again is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to open up our message here. And then the first field I'll create is just called the content. So this is just the text displayed within the message itself. And this will just be a text field type, nice and simple. And then finally, the last data field I'll need to add is just a way to recognize what channel this message will be posted within. So I'll create a new field and call this channel. And I will select that this will need to be our channel data type. And once again, one message will only link to one single channel within our Slack workspace. So I'm going to leave this option here to list this as a field of multiple entries blank, and then I will choose to create that. And that is actually all of the data fields and types we'll need to add into our application today. This one is pretty straightforward in comparison to some of the other tutorials and products that I've ran us through in the past. But as you can see, it's never been easier to build out your own custom database entirely out of no code using Bubble's tool. And by all means, if you'd like to store any additional information within any of these data types here, I'd recommend just pausing the tutorial and taking the time to add in any of those data fields that you would like to register. The first feature that we'll be building out today within our tutorial is the process to register a new user's account, as well as within this process, create a new team workspace. Now, one thing Slack's really renowned for is having a very seamless onboarding experience that allows someone to create an account and also register a team workspace at the same time. So that's something that I'm going to be walking us through in great detail today. So this is by far one of the longer modules within our tutorial today. But I'd also just like to iterate that if you find yourself getting lost at any time, be sure to pause the tutorial and rewatch any of the steps that I've walked you through, just so you get a full understanding of what it is that I'm building and creating before you move on to the next step. So let's jump on over into our Bubble editor, and now we can get started. Over in my editor here, the first thing I want to do is create a new page that allows us to add some elements and input forms for a user to register an account. So the way I'll be doing this is by selecting the page drop-down menu in the top left corner of our page, and I'll be selecting to add a new page, and I'll be calling this page register. I'll choose to create that. And one thing I would just like to note before we start building out this page is the actual current experience that Slack has when you create an account through their platform. And one thing you'll notice is that Slack has just a generic registration page as the first step in their workflow. And this is where you will need to add in some basic information about yourself. So in this case, they require just an email address. And then once you've added in a valid email address, it will send you through to another page where you can start to create your own team and workspace. And this is an experience that I'll also be replicating within my own registration page. So let's jump back over into our Bubble editor. And the first thing I'll do on this page is actually just update the background color here just to a light shade of gray. This is just a personal preference I have. It's not something that's mandatory. But the reason I do this is because if I'm adding any white elements on this page, like an input form, it just allows me to see where the constraints of those elements lie in comparison to the borders of my page. And now the first thing I'll be doing on my registration page here is just adding in a heading at the top, so just a text element. And I'll just add in a static heading that displays register account. And I'll update this style to be a H2 style heading. I'll then just close off the empty space within that element. I will double press and center this horizontally so it's in the middle of my page. And then from here what I'll do is I will copy that heading one more time. I'll drag this below. And in the instance of my Slack clone today, I'm just going to be changing a few little things on our first initial registration page. So as it stands, Slack just requires you to register an email address. What I would like to do though is also register someone's name, an email address, and their password before I then send them on through to the next page in our user sign-up flow. So what I'll be doing here is just updating the name of this heading to display the static text name. And then I will scroll on down under our input forms on the left-hand side here and select to add in an input field. I'll drag this out. And this is the field where a user can enter their name. And then of course we'll be storing that information within our database. And what I'll need to do here is just update the name of the input to be called input name. So that way when I do create a workflow to register this input in my database, I know exactly what input to reference when I need to store that value. I will also just select our title here and move these over into the center roughly. I'm personally not too concerned about the design aspect of our tutorial today. My goal is just to run you through all of the necessary workflows you need to power your application. And then of course you can retrofit any of the features that I teach you into your own application and design it how you would like. From here though, what I'm going to do is just copy both the heading and the input form. I'll paste that in. I'll drag this out so it's roughly below that. I'll then update my heading here to display the text email as I'd like to register someone's email address. And now that means I'll also need to update the name of our second input here to be called input email. And then another thing I'll need to do is update the content format for this email field. So at the moment it's set to be a text content format, but I'll need to update this to be an email content format, so that way Bubble can verify that it is a legitimate email address. And then finally there's one last field I would like to add, and that is a field for a user to add in a password. So I will be copying this heading as well as the input field again. I'll drag this down. And then I'll update this static heading here to display the word password. I will then of course update the name of the input to also be called password. And then I will update the content format to be a password, which just means that Bubble will hide the characters that are added into this field. And now what I can do is add in a button element that allows someone to click this and it will trigger a workflow, which of course will register their account. And I'll be updating the text on this button to display the word register. And one thing I would like to do though for my design today is just edit the color of this button just to be the same purple color code as Slack, so the branding matches. If you'd like that color code, it's just 611 F69. I'll then jump back into my design tab. I'll center that horizontally. And now what I can do is create a workflow to not only register the details of this person's account, but also send the user through to the next page of our onboarding process. So in order to do this, what I'll do is select the Start Edit Workflow button. And the first action I would like to select is under our account option here. And I'll be selecting the Sign the User Up option. And as you can see here, Bubble will need to just match an email and a password for this new user that was signing up. This will of course allow them to log in with those credentials when they'd like to return to our application. And of course these two fields here will need to match the same fields that we've just added onto our page. So I can select that the email for this user will be storing within their account should be the same value as the input email on our page. And then the password should also be the same value as the input password. Now what I'd also like to do, and this is what I love about this sign up process, is also update another field within our database that just stores some additional information for the user at this time. So in this case, I'd just like to store their name. So I'll be selecting from the name data field. And then I would like this to equal the same value as the input name field that we had on our page. Now, after we've registered a user's account, what I'd like to do is actually create an experience that now redirects a user to the second step within our onboarding process. And if I jump back over to Slack, I can show you what kind of experience they've created here. So if I just register a generic email address that I have and select continue, and after you enter in your email address, you'll be prompted here to actually start to create your own Slack workspace. So if I select to create a new workspace, you can see that we've been redirected to this page here where it starts to ask us to provide a name for our company or team. And what I love about this experience is that if I was to add in a name, so I'll just say test team, it actually starts to create an experience where you can view the data that you're adding into this input. And this is definitely something we can replicate within our own Bubble application. So what we'll need to do first is actually just create a page that we can redirect users to once we've registered their initial details. So if we jump back into our Bubble editor here, what I would like to do is add in another event here within our workflow. And within this, I'd like to choose from the navigation event, which of course will send a user through to another page. So I'll select the go to page option. And at this point in time, our destination page doesn't yet exist, of course, because we'll need to create a new page. So if we jump over to our page drop-down menu here, we can select to add in another page. And I'll be calling this page create team. I will select to create that. And now on this page, if I jump over into my design tab, the first thing I will need to do is actually just update the type of content that this page will display. So instead of this being just a static page to display generic information, what I would like to do is send through the data of the new user we've just created so we can pull and display their name or store any other additional information within their profile. And the way we can do this is by updating the type of content that will be displayed on this page. So I'll be selecting that this will need to display user content because of course in my first step of our workflow on our initial registration page, I had created a new user and I'll be sending through the data of that user to this page. So if I jump back over now to my initial registration page, open up our workflow editor, I will select the destination page for our navigation event here to be the new create team page that I've just added. And then the data I would like to send is the current user. So the person who's just created an account within the first step of our workflow. And now once we've sent our users through to our new create team page, we can select that from our page drop-down menu here and open that up. As always, the first thing I'll be doing before I design this page is just updating the background color. So it's just that light shade of gray again. And now what I'd like to do is replicate a similar experience to Slack here, where if I open up my tab, you can see that it asks an initial question and there's 3 different steps within this onboarding process. So it'll start by asking me what company name I would like to add to my team. If I select next, it'll store that information. And now it would like me to create a channel. So let's say I want to call a channel marketing. I could select next. And you'll now see that it has created a new channel called marketing on the side here. I apologize if my screen recorder is covering that up, but you can just see here it displays channels and there's a channel called marketing. And then within the third step, it would like me to start inviting users through to our workspace. And all 3 of these steps can be replicated quite easily within our Bubble experience. But I just encourage you to follow along in detail because there are a few little specific tedious things that I'd like to cover. And if this is your first time using Bubble, this might be a little bit confusing, but I'll be sure to explain everything in as much detail as I possibly can. So the first thing I'd like to do to our page is actually just ask the initial question that we had before. So we were asking a user what they would like to name their company or team. And now the way I can do this is by adding in what's called a group element onto our page, just over on the right hand side here. And by default, this group will be transparent. So I just like to update the group style to be called group border, which is just a default style from Bubble, just so I can see the background of it. And the reason I'll be using a group element here is because I'd like to store my first question within it. Because if I add any elements within a group, I can just show you an example here. I can then drag this group around, and the other thing I like about groups is that you can hide and display them whenever you would like. So let's say this is the first question within our onboarding experience, so step 1 of 3. What I could do is choose to display this group when our page is loaded, and then once a user adds in a name for a team or company, we could then hide this group and display the next group, which would be the next step in our workflow where we ask what channel they'd like to name. And so what I'm going to do is start by updating the name of this group first to be called group step 1. And then I'll be adding in some static text within our text element here. So I'd like to ask, what is the name of your company or team? I will then update the style of this to be a H1 dark style font. And then I will expand this down. And I'll just move that heading up to the top of our group there. And now below this heading here, I'm actually just going to reduce the size of that a little. I can then add in a input field again. I'll just drag this out. And this is where the user can add in their actual team name. So I'll be calling this input team name. And then below this, I will just stretch my group out a little more. And I'll add in a button element. I'll just reduce the width of that. And this button will just display the word next. I might even just make that a little bit taller there. Perfect. And now after I've added in this button, what I would like to do is just replicate the same experience from Slack, where it displays a preview of the company's name on the left-hand side of our screen here. And the way I can do this is by selecting to add in another group element here. So if I just drag out a group along the left-hand side of our screen, I can then also update the style of this group. In this case, I do just want to create a unique style because I'd like this group to be the same purple color as our button there. So I will update the style here and I will call this group onboarding page. I will create that. And now I can edit the style of this group. And I will update the background color to be a flat color. And then I'll just be pasting in the same color code as our button there. I'll jump back over to my design tab and you can now see that this group is purple. But now what I'd like to do is just create an experience where I can store and display the name of the company that a user adds within this field. And then when the user selects the next button, hide this group, display our next group, but maintain the information of the company name that they've created in this group here. And the way I can do this is by using what's called custom states within Bubble. Now, if you're new to Bubble, custom states are a powerful feature that allow you to just store data and information without having to store anything in your database. And these are a very powerful feature that you can utilize throughout many different experiences within Bubble. But I'll be walking you through today how we can use it to, of course, just store a value of the company name within our group here. So what I'll need to do first is update the type of content of this group to be a team, which of course is a data type within our database, because within this group, I'd obviously like to display the name of a team. And then what we'll need to do is add a data source for this group so that it knows which specific team to display. And now, because when a user adds in a team name within this field, we haven't yet stored any data within our database. So what we can do is temporarily store a value of a team name within this group. And then when someone selects the next button, we can then create a workflow that grabs out that temporary value and creates that team within our database. And the way I can handle this is by, as I mentioned before, creating a custom state. So when you've selected our group here, you can choose the information icon within the Bubble Inspector here, and then we can choose the option to add a custom state. And now what I'd like to do is call this custom state displayed team because I will be storing the value of the team I would like to display, which of course is the value that the user will add into the first input on this page. And then I will select the state type to be the value of a team, because of course, as I just explained, we are displaying a team. And then I will select to create that. And now I can close our custom state here and select the data source to display the value of the team that's stored within our custom state. So I can select from our data source that I would like this to be the group team, which is the group that we're currently working in. Its displayed team custom state, so the state that we just created. Its value. So whatever team we store within that custom state will now be sent through to this group, which means of course that I can then grab a text element, can drag this out, and I can display the name of the team that's stored within this group. And the way I can do this is by selecting to insert dynamic data, and I can choose to display the parent group's team. So the parent group is of course the purple group that this text sits within, and the team of course is the custom state that I've just created. And it will be the value of the team that the user creates. I'd like to display the name of that. And then I can update the text here to be a H2 light style font. So now it will display that accordingly based on the name of the team that someone creates. And now that we're ready to display the name of a team that has been created, what I can do is go ahead and create our first workflow when this next button is selected here. So I'll choose to start edit a workflow. And of course, within this workflow, I just like to create a new team within our database. So I can select from our data tab to create a new thing. And then the thing I would like to create is a team. And then the data field I would like to register is the name of the team. And this will of course be the input team name that we've added within our group there. And now once we've created our team, there's also an initial piece of data I would like to update for this team that's just been created. And that is the slug of this team. So if you're not familiar, a slug is just another term for a custom URL that you can associate to something. So in this case, I would like to create a custom URL that is our application. So let's say it's slack.com. And what I'd like to do is add on a custom URL string that is just the value of the team name that we've created. So let's say my team is, as an example, called Instagram. If I'm creating a Slack workspace for Instagram, I would like our URL to be slack.com/Instagram. And the way I can do this is by adding another step within our workflow. As it stands, the slug isn't actually a value that you store within your data field, so we won't need to change it within this initial step of our workflow. But what we can do is then search for the word slug within our next action and choose the set a thing slug option. And now the thing I would like to change is the result of step 1 in our workflow. So the step 1 was of course where we were creating a team. So this just identifies that I'd like to change the slug of the team that we've just created. And the slug itself I would just like to add is the result of step 1, the name of that team, which just means that whatever the company is called, that will be the name of the unique URL for this company. And the reason I will need to store this slug is because when I'm sending out email invites, it will just allow us to create a custom URL with this team's unique name, which will later on in our tutorial allow someone to click an invitation link and then be redirected through to this company's workspace. But I'll be sure to highlight that in more detail when we actually get to that step. But in the meantime, what I'd like to do is add an additional step to my workflow that now sends the value of the team we've just created through to our purple group here, so we can actually display a name for this team. I could also, if I want, before I do that, just add in some placeholder text into our input form here. So I could just say add team name, just so the user experience is a bit more clear. But now we can jump back into our workflow. And what I'll need to do, if you remember, that purple group that we had created a custom state on can store the value of a team. So of course, I would like to send through the team that we've just created and store that within that group itself. And so the way I can do this is by searching for the word state within our workflow action here. and select the set state of an element option. The element that I want to set the state for is our group team, so the purple group. And the state I would like to set is the displayed team option, which of course should be the only option because that's the only state we've created. And now the value of this state, so the team that we would like to display within that group, should once again be the result of step 1 in our workflow, which was the new team that the user had just created. And now after we have set the state of this group and displayed the name of the new workspace that the user's just created, I would then like to hide our group here and display the next group, which of course will be the next question, which asked us what channel we would like to create. And now the way I can do this is by once again leveraging another custom state. So I apologize if you were a little confused at the first custom state that we had created, but I'm sure you'll quickly learn how powerful custom states can be in terms of creating really rich experiences for your end users, which is of course really important if you'd like to create a good user experience. Now what I would like to do, and as it stands, this group here that we've added on our page has an option ticked here that indicates it will be visible on page load. So essentially whenever this page is loaded, this group will automatically display. So what I'd like to do is actually unselect that option, which just means that this group won't be visible when the page loads. I would also just like to select to collapse this element's height when it's hidden. So that essentially just means that if there's any elements below this and this group isn't displayed, they will just move up and take its place. Now this shouldn't be completely necessary on our page, but because we're going to be working with multiple groups, it's just something I'd like to note moving forward. And now what we'll need to do is actually create a state on our page itself and identify what step of our onboarding experience we're currently on. So at the moment, as you can see, this group is called step 1 because that was the first of 3 steps that a user had to go through in order to create an account. And then what I'd like to do is identify if we're currently in step 1, display this group. If we're in step 2, I wouldn't like this group to display, and I would like to display the next group, which would be the next question. And that would also be the case for step 3 of our workflow. But the way we can create this is by selecting our actual page itself. So I'd just like to reiterate that the page is the gray background here. So if you just select that, and if you remember, we've called this page create team. So as it stands, we're inspecting the element of this whole page, which means that we can also add a custom state onto this page. So I can select the information icon here, choose to add a custom state, and I would like to call this state step 1, and I'll be selecting this state type to be a yes/no state. So what this essentially means is that we'll be able to identify if we're in step 1 of our onboarding experience, and that will be a yes or no value. So we either are in step 1 or we aren't in step 1. I'll choose to create that. And essentially what I'd like to do is create an experience that identifies when we're in step 1. So when step 1 state is yes, I would like this group here to display. Now, because I'd like this group to display as soon as our page is loaded, because it is our first question and I don't want there to be a blank space here, what I can do is actually set the default value of this state here to be yes. So now the step 1 value will be yes, and then I can create a condition on this group to display this element when this step is also yes. So now by default, as soon as our page is loaded, that state will be identified as yes. And as I mentioned, I'm going to select my group element here, so the group step 1. And what I can do is select to create a condition on this group. I'll define a new condition. And I would like this condition to identify when the page that we've created, so the create team page down here, when its step 1 state is yes, I will select the this element is visible option, and I will tick that that should be true. So now this group will in fact display when the step 1 state is yes, which of course, if you remember on our page, we've just created a state that makes the step 1 process yes by default. So it will automatically load. And now from here, what I can do is move on to the next step of our onboarding experience. So if I would like to move this group out of the way, what I can do is select from our elements tree in the top left corner here and select the eye icon here, and that will then hide that group. And if you find yourself switching between pages and for some reason you can't see this group, you just need to remember that we've unselected that this group is visible on page load, so it obviously won't be displayed by default. But if you ever do need to display it again, just under your elements tree, select the eye icon there, and that will toggle that on and off. But now essentially what I'd like to do is just replicate another group and actually ask the user to create a channel. And to actually streamline this process in our build, I'm just going to display this group, make a copy of it, drag that down a bit, and then just hide that step 1 group again. I'll also just need to update the name of this group to be called step 2. And then I can also just move this up in our page. And then I can just update the static text that's displayed here. So I can just ask, what's your team working on right now? And then I will also just update the placeholder text of this input field here to display e.g. marketing, sales, etc. And then I will also need to update the name of this input to be called input channel, because this will be the first channel that a user creates. But what I'd also like to do is just make sure that this group isn't visible on page load, which it shouldn't right now, which just means that I'm going to need to create another custom state on our page that identifies if we're in step 2 of our onboarding experience. And if we are, I would like this group to actually be displayed. So once again, the way I can do this is by selecting our page here, so our create team page. I can select the information icon and open up our custom state list. And within this, I'd just like to create another custom state. This time I'll be calling this step 2. And this will be a yes/no state once again. Now this time I won't be setting a default value to this state because I'd like to manually change it. I don't want this group to be displayed automatically when our page is loaded. But in order to now switch these groups between step 1 and step 2, I'll need to create a workflow when the next button is selected within our first group that just updates the state of the page from 1 to 2. So the way I can do this is just by closing that menu, opening up my step 1 group again, and then I will select to create a workflow when the next button is clicked on our step 1 of our workflow here. So I could even update the name of this to be called button next step 1. And then within our workflow, which we had already started working on, so of course, just to reiterate, we created a team, we set the slug of that team, and then we sent through the value to our group. What we'll now need to do is change the custom state of our page. So we'll be turning off the step 1 state to no, and then turning on the step 2 state to yes. So what I'll do is type in the word state. I will then select the element to be the create team, which is our whole page. And I would like its step 1 state to now become no, which means it will hide this group. And then I'd like to add another step within our workflow. Once again, I'll be setting a custom state. The element will of course be our create team page, and the step 2 state will now be yes. And now that we've set the step 2 state of our page to be yes, we can jump back over to our design tab here. I would like to just close our first group by selecting that eye icon. And now what I'll also just need to do is update the condition that we added on our group step 2 here. So as it stands, this group is still only displaying when the step 1 state is yes. I would like this to now display when the create team, so our page, its step 2 state is yes. So now when the step 1 state is yes, this group won't display, and when it's changed to step 2, it will in fact display now. From here, I can then choose to create a workflow when this next button is selected. And that of course will create a new channel within our team. So I'll be updating the name of this button to be called button next step 2. I will then choose to start edit a workflow. And the first thing I'd like to do within this workflow is select from our data tab here and choose to create a new thing because I'll be creating a new channel in this instance. So I'll be selecting to create a new channel from our database, and then I'll need to update the data fields that we're storing within this channel. So I would like the name of this channel to be the input channel name. So that's the input in our second step group. I'll choose that, its value. And then I'll need to associate this channel with a team. Now this is the benefit to storing a custom state within our purple group here. Because we're storing the value of the team that we created in step 1 of our workflow, we can then reference that at any given time. So I can jump back into my workflow editor here and update the team itself to be the value of the group team, which is our purple group. I will choose its displayed team, which was the custom state that we were storing. And now it will save that team that the user created in step 1 of their workflow. I would also then just like to add another step within our workflow to add this channel to the user's list of all the channels that they're a part of. So because they've created it, they'll need to have immediate access to be involved in that channel. So I'll select to add another step in our workflow, choose from our data tab, and in this case, I'll be selecting the make changes to a thing option, not the create a thing option. The reason is because I'd like to make changes to the current user, so the person who's just logged in, has registered an account, and has signed up their team. What I would like to change is the channels joined field within their database, which if you remember is just a list of all of the channels that they're a part of. And I would like to add the result of step 1 in our workflow where we were creating a new channel. And now from here, the only other thing I'll need to do within this workflow is just switch the states over again. So I'll be turning off the step 2 state, and then I'll create a step 3 state for the final step within our onboarding process. So within the workflow editor, I will type in the word state. I'll choose set the state of an element. The element is of course our create team, so the whole page. I will set the step 2 state to now be no, which means it will now hide that group. And what I'd like to do is then create a step 3 state and turn that to yes. So I'll just need to jump back over to my design tab, select my page, so the whole gray background here, making sure that of course this is the create team page. I'll open up the information icon. I'll select to add a new state, and our last state will be called step 3. This again of course will be a yes/no state. I'll choose to create that, and there will be no default value for this state. But back in my workflow editor now, I will add another step here. I'll type in the word state again, and I would like to update the create team page, the step 3 state, to now be yes. Now that we've finished building out the last step in this workflow, there is one last feature I would like to add into our page here, and that is actually displaying the name of the channel that the user has just created within this team. And so the way I can do this is by adding in a group element into our page. And of course, as by now you've probably noted that what I love about groups is that you can store data within them. So I'll start by updating the name of this group to be called group channel. And then essentially what I'd like to do is update the type of content of this group to also be a channel. And from here, what I'll need to do is add in a data source to identify what particular channel it is I would like to store within this group. And this is quite straightforward because at this point in time, we've only actually created one channel underneath this team. So if you remember in our workflow where we were creating a channel, we were storing that value within a team. And the value of that team was the team that we had within our custom state for this group. So the purple group here, if you remember, was storing the value of a team. What I can do is reference that team within my second group, so the group within our group. I know that's very confusing, but we can then identify the first channel that's been added to this team and display its name within this group. So the way I can do this is by adding in a data source, and I'd like to perform a search for something in my database. The thing I'd like to search for is a channel. And the channel I would like to actually identify is the channel where the team equals the same team that's stored within the custom state of our purple group. So I'll select where the team is the value of the parent group's team. And by parent group, it just means that this second group here obviously sits within our purple group, so it's able to leverage the data source of that group. And so at the moment, it's currently searching for a list of every single channel where the team equals the parent group's team. Of course, though, we'd only like to just display one specific channel, which is the channel that the user has just created. And so because there is only one channel that's been created, we can select from our operator here and choose to display its first item, which just means that Bubble's going to perform a search for every single channel where the team matches that value, and it will only return the first channel that it finds within that list, which is the only channel that we've created by this point. And now from here, what I can do is actually add in a text element into our group here. I will update this to display the word channels. I can also update the style of this to be a H2 light style heading. Also just move my group across so that these are in line. I'll just move that to the right so it looks like it sits within my team's name. I can close the space of that element. I can copy that. And now what I'd like to do is actually display the name of the channel I created. So I will backspace the static text. I will add in a hashtag, and I will choose to display the parent group's channel, its name. Now, of course, the parent group for this element is, of course, our second group here with the transparent background, which I'm just going to close the empty space of that group there. And now there is one last thing I'd like to do to this group, and that is, of course, create a condition that only allows it to be displayed when a channel has been created. So obviously I wouldn't like anyone to see this channel title here until they've actually created a channel within their workspace. And so the condition I can create on this is pretty straightforward. I'll just make sure I've selected the group channel, and I'll create a condition that identifies when I'll need to perform a search through my database, search for all of the channels. So when there is a channel where the team equals the parent group's team, so similar to the data source for this group, whenever there is a channel within this team's workspace, I would like this group to display. So essentially what I'd like to do is have Bubble perform a search for all of the channels, and if it finds that there is one channel in our database that's associated with the current workspace that the user is creating, it will display this group and of course all of the elements within that group. So what I can do is identify whenever there's a channel that belongs to this team and the count of those items is greater than 0, so that just means that a channel has been created for this team, I would like to select that this element is visible and tick that that is true, which then means under my appearance tab here, I'm just going to need to unselect that this element isn't visible on page load, and then also select to collapse its height when it's hidden. And now this group will only display once a user has created a new channel within our onboarding experience. And now after we've finished creating the whole step 2 process of our onboarding experience, there's one last step we'll need to add, and if I jump back over to Slack, you'll see here that it is the process where we can start to add different teammates within our workspace. And this again is a process that we can replicate within Bubble. Of course, it might get a little bit confusing because I'll be leveraging another custom state, but I'll be sure to walk us through this in as much detail as I can. Essentially though, what I'd like to do is just copy this group here on our page, drag that down. I'll just quickly update the name of this to be called step 3. And then I will choose to hide the step 2 group. So I'll jump into my elements tree, select the eye icon, and then I can move this group up again, make sure it's in line with our heading. And now from here, the first thing I'll be doing is updating the static text here to display invite team members. And that is a smaller heading, so I can just drag that down. And then I will also just move our input element up. And I will update the name of our input element to be called input email addresses. And I will update the placeholder text to just display test@gmail.com. just so it allows someone to know that that is where they'll need to add in an email address. And then essentially what I'd like to do is create an experience where someone can continually add in as many different email addresses as they would like. And then I would like to send them through an invitation to this workspace. So what I'll be doing is adding in just a text element below here. And I will be typing in a static heading that just displays invite team member. I would also just like to bold this text because I would like a user to essentially click this like a button after they've added an email address. So I'll select to open the rich text editor here. I'll just highlight that text and bold that. I'll select to save it. Now that just stands out a little bit more. I can also just close that element off if I would like. And then below this, what I'd like to do is just display a list of all of the email addresses that someone would like to invite to their workspace. So in order to make space for this, I'll just need to drag out the height of my group. I'll just move my button down as well. And then I can select to add in what's called a repeating group element into this page. Now, if you're not familiar with repeating groups yet, if you haven't used them, they're a powerful element within Bubble that just allows you to display a list of items. So a good example that I like to use for a repeating group is, let's say you're creating like a social network similar to Instagram, and you would like to display a list of all of the images that users have uploaded into your database. A repeating group just allows you to dynamically display a list of all of those images. And we'll be using it today to display a list of all of the names that a user adds within their invite field here. So I'm going to be updating the name of this repeating group to be called Team Emails. And then I would like to update the type of content to just display some text. Traditionally, you could link a repeating group to your database. I will be doing that in another module, but just for now, I'm going to be storing this as text. And essentially what I'd like to do is every time an email address has been added into this input field and a user selects the invite team member button, I would like to then store that email address within our repeating group. And then when the next button is selected, I would like to send an email invite to all of those emails that are associated with this repeating group. And so the way I can do this is by, once again, using another custom state. I know you're probably sick of them to death right now, but it really is an essential feature to create this kind of experience within Slack. So of course, the way we can create a custom state is by selecting the information icon here and choosing to create a new custom state. And I'll be calling this state type Team Emails. And I would like this state type to just be text, but I would like to select that this is a list of multiple text fields. Because of course there could be multiple emails that someone would like to send an invite to. And even if there is only one email, it will just store that one email address and send it to that relevant user. I'll select to create this custom state. And now what I'd like to do is just close that. And I would like the data source of this repeating group, so the list of text that it will display, I would like it to be the custom state that we've just added, which is storing the email addresses in it. So I'll select the data source to be our repeating group team emails, the list of text, the team emails here, which is our custom state. And now after configuring our data source, I can update the layout style here. I would like to select this to be extended vertical scrolling, which just means that, let's say there's only one email address in here, the repeating group will collapse, so there's not all of these empty grids. And if there's more than 4 email addresses, it will expand. So it will just continually display all of the email addresses that you need. I'll also just update the number of rows to be 2 for now. And then I would like to add in a text element within our repeating group, which of course will just display the email address that the user has just added. So I can select to insert some dynamic data here and choose to display the current cell's text. So the cell is the row within our repeating group. And in this case, the current cell's text will just be the email address that we're sending through to this custom state. And then once I've added this in, I'm just going to move this across to the side of my repeating group. And I will actually just move the repeating group over itself so the text lines up there. And then I can close off the empty space within our repeating group. And also just collapse the width of our text element. and also the width of our repeating group. Then I can move our next button up here and close off the space of this group. And now before I create the workflow when this next button is selected, what I'll need to do is first build out a workflow that updates the list of emails that we're storing here and adds to it any email that a user adds within this input field. And so the way I can do that is by selecting our invite team member text here. I'll choose to start edit a workflow. And within this workflow, what I'll need to do is once again choose to set the state of an element. The element that we'll be setting our state for is our repeating group. And the state will of course be the team email state. And what I'd like to do is identify the current emails stored within this state, and then I would like to add to it another email address that's added within our input field. So that way a user can add in as many different email addresses for team members as they would like. So first I'll need to identify the current value of this list. So what email addresses already exist within this state. And the way I can do this is by scrolling on down to our repeating group again. I would like to select its team email state, so its current value. Of course, if there's no email stored within that, there will be no value, so it'll just add a first entry into that state. And then what I'd like to do from here is scroll on down and choose the plus item option, so I would like to add to it. And in this case, the value that I would like to add is the input email addresses, its value. So that is just the input form of our step 3 in our custom state. And now every time this invite button is selected, it will then add that name into our repeating group. But what I'd also just like to do is if I jump back into the workflow editor, is just choose to reset the value of our input field. So at the moment, if someone was to add an email address and if they were to select to invite that team member, the email would be sent to our repeating group here, but it would also remain stagnant within our input field there. What we can do is just create a reset action that just resets this value to null. So I'll just jump back into the workflow editor and scroll on down to the element actions here and choose to reset inputs. And now that will reset the value of that input field. And now the final thing that we can do within this whole onboarding experience, I know so far this has been a huge module with plenty to run through, but what we can do is build out the last workflow that will finish off this onboarding experience by sending out the invitation emails to all these users, and then we will redirect the user through to a home page where they can start to use the application. So what I'll do is I'll select to start edit a workflow when this button is selected. I'll also just update the name of this button to be called button step 3. And then I can jump on down to start edit this workflow. And now the first step I would like to create within this workflow is select from the email option here and choose the send email event. And in this case, what I'd like to do is start by identifying who it is exactly I'd like to send this email to. And that of course will be all of the email addresses stored within our repeating group where we had them stored in a custom state. So I can select to insert dynamic data and choose to send an email to the repeating group's list of team emails. So any email addresses that are stored within that custom state. I can update the sender's name to just be Slack. So that'll just be the name of the application that's sending them this email. I'll just update the subject to be called Slack invite. And for now, the body text within this email, I'm just going to keep quite straightforward. I'm just going to send, you've been invited to join, and then I would like to say the name of the user. So let's say I was to send you an invite to my Slack workspace I created. It would just send through, you've been invited to join Lachlan Slack workspace. So I will select to insert dynamic data here, and I can add in the current user, so the person who's just created their Slack account, their name. So in my case, it would be Lachlan Kirkwood. I will then add a apostrophe here and add the plural of S. And then I will type in the word Slack workspace. And that's all I'm going to add for this email now. Later within another tutorial, I'll be explaining how we can send through things like the unique URL slug for the team that we've just created. But for now, I'm just going to keep things pretty straightforward and simple here. What I would like to do after all these emails have been sent is now redirect a user through to a home page of our application. And of course, I would like to then send through all of the data of the new team name and channels that they've created, so that way they can easily start using the product itself. So in order to do this, I'll need to create a new page within our application. I'll be calling this page Home. I'll choose to create that. And now I'm not going to do anything on this page right now except for update the type of content that we'll be displaying on this page. So if you've ever used Slack before, you'll know that on the left-hand side, it'll display a list of all your channels, and on the right-hand side, it will display a thread of all of the messages. And in order to structure what channels and messages I would like to display, I'm going to need to update the type of content of the page to identify a specific team, because within that team, I'll then be able to pull out the channels and messages that are associated with it. So I'll update the type of content to be a team, and now I can jump back into my workflow editor under my Create Team page. And the workflow I'll be opening is when the Step 3 button is selected. After the invitation emails have been sent out, I would like to select from a navigation event, choose the Go to Page option. I'll select the destination page to be our home page. And of course from here, what I'll need to do is send through some data to that page. So because that page type of content is set to be a team, I'll need to send through the value of a team. And if you remember, back on my design tab, we of course have stored that team value within our purple group here. So if I jump in my workflow editor, the value I would like to send is the group team, which you can see is the purple group. It's displayed team, which is the custom state within that group. And finally, that is it for this onboarding experience. I know it has been one long module so far. Before we jump over and preview our application though, I'm just going to need to update the condition of this group here. And so at the moment, this group is displaying when the step 2 process is yes. I would like to update this to only display it when the step 3 custom state is yes. And that is the last thing we'll need to do. Now if we head over into our registration page here, we can preview what this whole experience looks like from creating our initial user account through to actually creating our first workspace in Slack. So on my registration page here, I'm going to add in my name, Lachlan Kirkwood. I'll add in an email address. I'll say testemail@gmail.com. I'll add in a very secure password. And then as you can see, the workflow has sent us through to our Create Team page here, where we can start the onboarding process of building out our first workspace. So in this case, I'm going to call my team name Building with Bubble. I will select Next. That will then create our team. And then you'll see after our team has been created, the step 1 state has been changed, which means that that first group will be hidden and our second one will now display. If I was to then create a workspace within this team, so I'll call this Marketing, I'll select Next to create that. You can see that the channels will display underneath that now. I can also just see that that title has been split onto 2 lines because I haven't actually extended the length of that element. And now what I can do is select to add in any email addresses I would like to send through to my team members. So I can say test1@gmail.com. I'd like to send them an email. I'll select the invite team member. You'll see that email has been added into our repeating group and the value has been reset within our input form here. I could then send an email to also test2@gmail.com. I'll select to invite that team member as well. And then from here, I can select the next button. That last workflow will run. It will send the emails out to our team members. And I can also see here, we've been redirected through to our home page. And I can also see that the slug that we've created for this team has also been sent through with it. So the name of my team has also been sent through. Back in my Notion doc, I can finally check off that I finished building out the feature to create not only a user's account, but also the team workspace that they will be using throughout our application. As I mentioned, this is by far one of the bigger modules that we'll be covering in our tutorial today, so I apologize that this was the first thing that we really sunk our teeth into, but I really just wanted to highlight how powerful Bubble is in terms of creating the exact same onboarding experience as the real-world Slack product. After building out our process to register user accounts, we can finally now move along to the feature where we'll be building out our homepage. And within this, we'll be displaying a list of all of the Slack channels that are available to the team that a user is viewing. Let's jump on over into our Bubble editor and I'll show you how we can get started. Over in my editor here, I'm going to select from our drop-down menu and choose to open up our home page that we had previously created. And now I'd just like to reiterate at this point that the only thing that should be changed on our home page is that the type of content should be set to a team, because when a user created an account, we had sent through the value of that team or workspace that they had just created. What I would then like to do, as I always do on my pages, is just update the background color to be just a light shade of gray so I can get an idea as to where any elements lie in regards to our page borders. But the first thing I'd like to do is essentially just display a list of all of the available channels within this Slack team. But before I do that, I'll just be adding in a shape element just to make our MVP a little bit more on brand with Slack's actual user interface. So I will grab a shape element in, I will drag this out on our left-hand corner of our page, and I will be updating the color to just be the same purple color code that I had used before on our button elements. And the reason I'm using a shape here, not a group, is because I don't need to actually store any data within this element, so I don't need to use a group. Now from here, what I'd like to do is just add in a text element, and this will just be a static heading that displays the word channels. I'll then update the style of this to be a H2 light style heading, just so it's a white heading there. I can then just reduce the total size of that element. And now below this, what I would like to do is actually just display a list of all of the channels that belong to this team. And so the way I can start with this is by adding in a repeating group element here. And essentially what I'd like to do within this repeating group is exactly what I just mentioned before, display a list of all the channels in our database that have been associated with the team value of the team that the current user is working within. So I'll be updating the type of content here to be a channel because, as I mentioned, we'll be displaying a list of channels. And then for the data source, what we'll need to do is perform a search through our database for all of the channels. And then I can select to add in a constraint and identify all the channels where the team that they belong to equals the value of our current page team. Now the current page team is essentially just the team that we'll be displaying on our home page, and that's why we updated the value of the type of content to also be a team. And so whenever we send a team value through to this page, we can reference that and also choose to display all of its relevant channels on our left-hand side of our page here. But before we move on to actually adding in the names of these channels, there's one last constraint I would like to add within this repeating group, and that is only displaying the channels that the current user, so the person who's logged into their Slack account, only the channels that they are actually a member of. Because obviously I don't want to display every single channel for this whole team, because let's say a user isn't involved with that team or they shouldn't have access to that team, I obviously wouldn't like them to see that that channel exists and then of course open up the messages within that channel. So in order to restrict what channels we'll actually display to the person who's logged in with their Slack account, we can select that the name of this channel should be within, so I'll select the is in option, and then I will select from the current users their channels joined, so all the channels that they're actually a member of, and then I will select the name option. So now only channels where the name has the same name as a channel that a user is currently a member of, it will then only display this specific channel. Now, once I've finished configuring my repeating group here, I can then select to add in a text element. And within this, what I'd like to do is, of course, just display the name of the channel itself. So I'll select to, first of all, add in a hashtag, just like the same Slack experience that you're familiar with. And then I will insert dynamic data and choose to display the current sales channel's name. I'll also just update that to be a H3 light style font. And then I will move this up within our repeating group and close off the space of that repeating group. And while I'm here, I will also just update the layout style of this repeating group to be extended vertical scrolling. And then of course, I'll be updating the rows. I will just select this to be 3 to begin with, which just means we're gonna have to reduce the size of that again. That's fine. And I'll just move it down a tad from our heading there as well. Now that's how we can display a list of the channels here on the side of our page. But what I would like to do is essentially on the right here, and I won't be covering it in this module, but I'll definitely be running you through this in detail in a moment. But essentially what I'd like to do is obviously display a list of all the messages that belong to the channel that's been selected. And so the way I could do this is by storing a custom state again within the value of this page itself. So within our page where we've identified a specific team, what I could do is create a custom state that identifies what channel we'd like to display from this team on this page at that given moment. And then when a user selects that they would like to open this channel, it would update the custom state of this page, set the value of it to be that channel, and then I could display all of the messages within that channel. So in order to do this, I'll be selecting my page here, so just the gray background. I'll also just be making sure that our inspector here displays that that is our home page. I would like to select our information icon and choose the add a new custom state option. And the name of this state will just be called current channel. So this is the channel that a user will be viewing. And the state type will be a channel because I'll be storing a value of a single channel within it. I'll create that. And now what I'll need to do is create a workflow whenever this text element is selected. So I'll choose to start edit a workflow here when our channel option is clicked. And then what I'd like to do within this workflow is set the state of an element. The element will be our home page here, and the state will be the current channel. I would then like to set the value to be the current sales channel of our repeating group, which means that now I am storing a single channel within our total page. I can actually display the name of the channel that a user will be viewing. So I'll select to add in a text element here. And what I'd like to do is essentially just add in a hashtag as a static heading. And then I'd like to display the name of the channel that we're viewing. And of course, later on, I'll be adding a list of all the messages below this that belong to this channel. So from here, I will choose to insert dynamic data, and I would like to display the home page, its current channel custom state, which of course was a channel. And then I would like to display the name of that channel. So now every time someone selects to display a new channel, it will update the title of this channel according to the custom state that we've stored. From here, I can then just update the style of this heading to be a H2 dark style heading. I'll make this roughly in line with my other heading on the page there. And I can also just move that across further to the left side of our page. But now before we actually preview this page, there is one last small feature I would like to add. And that is a way to load a channel on this page by default. So as it currently stands, let's say a user was to open up their Slack application. Because the custom state of our home page doesn't have a default value, what we'll need to do is actually create that. Because if we don't have a channel stored on this page, this would just mean that the home page itself would be blank until a user selects to open up a channel. And so the way we can do this is a similar process to when we had actually set the custom state of our home page. only I would like to update the custom state as soon as the page is loaded, which thankfully is a trigger we can leverage in our workflow editor. So what I'd like to do is jump over to our workflow tab. I would choose to create a new workflow, and I would like this workflow to trigger every single time the page is loaded. And now within this workflow, I would like to once again set the state of an element. The element will of course be our home page. The custom state is the current channel it displays. And now what I'd like to do is just store the value of the first channel that a user has joined across our application. So in order to do this, I can select to choose from the current users, their total channels joined, which is a list of all of their channels. And from here, you could, choose any option here. So you could say that you want to display a random channel. In this case, I would like to just display the first channel that they've joined. So let's say the first channel someone has joined is the marketing channel. This will just open up that channel first. And so just now, whenever the page is loaded, that channel will display by default. That's all I'm going to cover in this specific module now. But let's go and take a look at what this whole experience looks like when I open up the homepage of my Slack product. So over on my homepage here, the first thing I can see is that the channel that I have first joined throughout my Lachlan Kirkwood account when I actually created this workspace, the name of that channel is displaying. But of course, I can't actually see a list of the channels within my channel repeating group here. And now that's because I've realized that when I was creating a workflow for someone when they were actually registering an account and then also creating a brand new workspace, I haven't actually just created a step in our workflow to add the team in our workspace to the current user's team that they belong to. I did cover this though in our second workflow where I was sending the invite out to our other team members for them to join that team. So what we'll need to do is just quickly jump back over into our bubble editor here. We'll open up our create team page. So this is where we were onboarding a brand new user and their workspace. I'll open up the workflow editor and choose the step 1 within our workflow. So I can see here that we had created a team, but we hadn't actually added that team to the current user's team that they belong to. So this is a really simple fix. What I can do is just choose to select from our data tab. I'll choose to make changes to a thing. The thing I'd like to change is the current user, so the person who just registered their account. And of course, I'd just like to update their team. And the value of this will be the result of step 1 in our workflow where we had created a new team. And then what I'll need to do is just move this workflow step, just make that step 3 in our workflow. So before we update any of those other custom states, what we'll do first is just make changes in our database to that team. And then what I'd also like to do on our home page, if I open this up, is just choose to create another page load event that just loads this user's team value by default onto our home page where we were storing the value of a team. And now the reason why we'll need to do that is because our channels here as they stand are currently searching for a list of all the channels where the team of those channels equals the current page team. And now when this page is loaded, unless you're sending data through to it from another page, it won't actually store a default value of a team. And so we'll need to do this every single time that a user opens this page. And this is actually just a fairly straightforward process. If we jump into our workflow editor, we currently already have an event that's triggered every time the page is loaded. And within this, we're just setting the custom state of the channel that we'll be displaying on the home page. What we could actually do before this is every single time the page is loaded, choose from a navigation event and actually reload that page and send through with it the value of the current user's team. So if we choose the navigation event, select the go to page option, we'll select the destination page will of course need to be our home page that we're currently on. And then the data we'll be sending through is the current user's team that they've joined. And now what I love about Bubble is that even though we are technically sending someone through to another page, because they're already on the home page, it won't actually reload the whole page. it'll just refresh the data that's displayed on that page. And now what I'd like to do is just drag this event over to be the first step in our workflow before we actually set the state of the page. And what I'll also need to do is create a way to terminate this workflow. So as it stands right now, every time we're loading the page, we're sending the user through to our home page and refreshing the data that displays on it. So right now, this would just be an infinite loop, meaning that it would constantly just reload the home page every single time the page is loaded. So a way we can stop this and only allow this workflow to run once is just by typing in the word terminate here and choose to terminate this workflow. So once this page is loaded, it will now reload the data that's displayed on our home page and send through the value of a team. It will then set the custom state of the channel we'll need to display, and it will then terminate this workflow so it doesn't keep recurring. The last thing I'll need to do before I actually just go and preview this one more time is just actually update the data field within my database for my user account. So at the moment, I currently don't have a team value stored within my account. If you look under the team field here, it's currently empty because when I registered an account and created a workspace, I obviously just didn't have that step in my workflow that was adding that team in. So what I'll do is actually just add in the value of the team I would like to join now. And this is what I love about Bubble's database. You have the complete power to manually customize any fields or values within any user accounts at all. And so the easiest way to add me to the Building with Bubble team that I created is just by typing in the team name. But in order to do this, I'll just need to change the search field that I will be displaying within this team field here. So I'll select change the search field. I would like the team value to not be a unique ID. I just like it to search for the name of that team. I will choose to save that. And now I can just type in the team name and it will actually prompt me with a suggestion that's already stored within our database. So I'll select Building with Bubble. I'll choose to save that within my database under my account. And now I will run the data as my current user who had created the Slack workspace. And now you'll see that on our page here, we have sent through the value of the team that I currently belong to. It's obviously pulling through the value of the first channel my current user has joined. And now it's also displaying a list of all the channels that belong to the current page's team. Now back in Notion, I'm going to check off that we've started building out our home page, which of course displays a list of all the channels that belong to the team that the current user is a part of. And then within that, we've also created a workflow to load and display a channel by default. And I've also explained how we can navigate between channels, which of course was the workflow we created to update the custom state value of the channel that we were storing. And that is all I have time for in this tutorial today. If you were interested in checking out the rest of the course, I'd recommend clicking the link in the description to purchase the full course. Within the complete course, I'll be walking you through the step-by-step instructions to complete the rest of our build. You can also get access to a suite of Bubble tutorials where you'll learn how to build other popular products. If you'd like to get started building some other popular products for free, I'll be sure to include some suggested links at the end of this video. Thanks again for taking the time to watch, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see any other useful tutorials to help you on your Bubble journey.